The grandfather paradox. You step through a shimmering portal. The air feels thick with the scent of burning coal, and the world around you is frozen in the haze of nostalgia. It's 1950, and the streets are bustling with vintage cars, women in elegant dresses, and men in neatly pressed suits, their shoes shining in the dull sunlight. You look down at your hands and realize you've traveled back in time to the moment that has always haunted your mind. The moment when your grandfather first met your grandmother. For years you've wondered, what would happen if you stopped them from meeting? What if you rewrote that one moment in history and changed the entire course of your existence, not out of malice but purely out of curiosity? An experiment to see if you could really rewrite destiny itself. You follow your grandfather, observing his daily routine. He walks to the corner diner every day, sits by the same window, and reads the newspaper. You've seen the scene countless times in your head, and now you're here. You see the young woman, who would later become your grandmother, walking into the diner and sitting at the same table where your grandfather always sits. Weeks pass. You learn their habits, their words, their movements. You prepare for that day, the fateful day when their paths will cross. But today is different. You make your move. You approach your grandfather, distract him, pull him away from the diner just for a few minutes. It's just long enough that he doesn't meet her. He turns around, confused, but oblivious to what's just happened. You watch as his life unfolds differently. He never meets her, never marries, never has children. The world begins to shift. You feel it in your bones. First, it's subtle. Your surroundings blur as memories begin to fade. You forget the sound of your own name, then your childhood home, your favorite song, the faces of your loved ones. The memories slip away like sand through your fingers. Then, just as suddenly, you're gone. There's no dramatic moment, no explosion of light. You simply vanish, erased from time, as if you were never there at all. This is the grandfather paradox. You've altered history, but in doing so, you've erased the very existence that allowed you to go back in time. If you're never born, then how could you have gone back to stop the meeting in the first place? You created a causal loop, a paradox with no clear beginning or end. It's a mind-bending contradiction. If you never existed, you could not have gone back to change the past, but if you didn't change it, you would still exist. The paradox forces us to confront the fragility of time and the absurdity of trying to control it. Is time a straight line, or is it more like a tangled knot, a loop that binds us all? 2. The bootstrap paradox. You've always been fascinated by the idea of time travel. One evening, while perusing your favorite antique shop, you come across something odd, a dusty, weathered manuscript. It's filled with strange symbols, diagrams, and what appears to be detailed instructions for building a time machine. Curiosity burns within you as you flip through the pages, realizing that these instructions are from the future. There's no way this manuscript could exist without some kind of explanation, but somehow it does. You decide to follow the instructions, to see if this time machine could be real. After weeks of hard work, you construct the machine, and with trembling hands, you set the controls to travel back in time. The machine hums to life, and in an instant, you find yourself in the past, right where you found the manuscript in the first place. But here's the twist. You bring the manuscript back with you and give it to your past self. They use the manuscript to build the machine. The manuscript is passed through time, but it never truly originates. It exists because of itself. No one wrote it, no one created it. It simply exists because you went back in time and gave it to yourself. This is a paradox, a loop of causality that has no true starting point. It's as if the manuscript has always existed, but it only came into existence because of your actions. Breaking it down, this is the bootstrap paradox. It suggests that an object or piece of information can exist without ever having been created. You receive the manuscript from your future self, but in doing so, you create the very future that would give you the manuscript. There is no original source. The manuscript's origin is tangled in time. It's a paradox that leaves us questioning the very fabric of reality. How can something exist without a creator? It makes us consider the nature of existence itself. Is it possible for things to exist without a cause? Or does everything have a beginning, even if we can't trace it? 3. The twin paradox. You've always wanted to understand the true nature of time, so you volunteer for a scientific experiment that promises to unlock the mysteries of relativity. The plan is simple. You'll board a spaceship and travel at nearly the speed of light, while your twin brother stays behind on Earth. You both will keep track of time, and after your journey, you will reunite and compare the results. The day arrives. You step aboard the sleek spacecraft, and the engine rumbles to life. As the ship accelerates, you feel the strange sensation of time slowing down. You glance at your watch, and sure enough, it ticks slower than it would on Earth. The further you travel, the more the fabric of time seems to stretch. You experience only a year of travel, but back on Earth, your brother ages much faster. You journey through distant stars and galaxies, but time feels different. Finally, after a year, you return to Earth. You step out of the spacecraft, eager to reunite with your twin. But when you see him, your heart sinks. He looks far older than you remember. Decades have passed for him, yet only 1 year has passed for you. The time dilation effect of your speed has caused your clocks to tick at different rates. You haven't aged, but he has. Breaking it down, this is the essence of the twin paradox, an anomaly predicted by Einstein's theory of relativity. Time is not absolute. It depends on your relative motion. For the twin traveling at near light speed, time slows down, while for the twin on Earth, time continues to move normally. This paradox forces us to reconsider how we perceive time, as something that isn't fixed but malleable and relative to our speed. Time, it seems, is not the universal constant we once thought it was. 4. The ship of Theseus. You stand on the deck of a grand ancient ship, staring out at the endless horizon. This is the ship of Theseus, a vessel that has sailed through storms and across vast oceans for centuries. Over time, the ship has undergone countless repairs. The wood has rotted, the sails have been replaced, and even the ropes have been swapped out for newer, stronger material. Slowly, piece by piece, the ship has been transformed. As you walk through the ship's corridors, you realize something unsettling. Every part of the ship has been replaced. There is no original wood left, no trace of the ship's former structure. Yet, it is still called the ship of Theseus. Then, an odd thought occurs to you. If you could somehow collect all the original parts that were removed over the years and reassemble them into a new ship, would that ship still be the ship of Theseus? You begin to question, is the identity of the ship based on its material parts or its continuity? The fact that it has sailed, uninterrupted, through the seas for centuries. Breaking it down, this is the ship of Theseus paradox. It challenges the notion of identity and asks us to consider what truly makes something itself. If you replace every part of an object, is it still the same object? This paradox extends beyond ships and challenges the nature of human identity as well. Over time, ourselves, our memories, and even our personalities change. Are we still the same person we were 10 years ago? The paradox raises questions about the nature of identity, continuity, and change. Is it the parts that matter, or is it the journey itself? 5. The Sorite's paradox, paradox of the heap. You're standing before a large heap of sand watching the grains pile up. It's massive, stretching in all directions like a miniature mountain. You begin removing grains one by one. With each grain that disappears, the heap seems to shrink, but it still looks like a heap. You remove another and another, yet the pile remains. Eventually, you remove so many grains that the heap becomes almost imperceptible. But at what point can you say that it's no longer a heap? Is it the moment you remove a single grain? Or is it only when the pile is completely gone? You stand there pondering the nature of change. It's a gradual process. Each removal of sand seems insignificant, yet when you look at the heap in its entirety, the change is profound. Breaking it down, this is the Sorite's paradox, also known as the paradox of the heap. It explores how we define categories and boundaries. At what point does a heap of sand stop being a heap? Is there a clear boundary? This paradox challenges us to think about how we define and categorize things in our world, especially when change happens in small, incremental steps. Where do we draw the line? When does something stop being one thing and become another? 6. The liar paradox. You're sitting in a small cafe, sipping on a warm cup of coffee. Across from you sits an acquaintance, someone you've met only a few times. They lean in and say, "Everything I tell you from now on is a lie." Your heart skips a beat. The words seem innocent enough, but now you're trapped in a strange dilemma. You wonder, if everything they say is a lie, then is this statement itself a lie? If their statement is false, then it must mean that they're telling the truth, which makes the statement true, which would mean it's a lie again. It's like trying to pin down a moving target. Every time you think you've caught it, it slips away. Your mind starts to spin as you consider the implications. Is it possible to speak a truth that contradicts itself? Can a statement both be true and false at the same time? This paradox challenges the limits of language and logic itself. It suggests that not all statements are straightforward and can lead to endless loops of self-refutation. You can't trust the speaker, but you also can't trust the idea that you can't trust them. It's the heart of the liar paradox, a puzzle that has confounded philosophers and logicians for centuries. The paradox shows how language and self-reference can create contradictions that seem to defy logic itself. Breaking it down, the liar paradox arises when a statement refers to itself, creating a loop where it can't consistently be either true or false. It raises deep questions about truth, self-reference, and the limits of logical systems. It's an idea that forces us to rethink how we define truth in a world full of contradictions. 7. The paradox of the unexpected hanging. Imagine you're in a courtroom. The judge stands before you and the other prisoners, delivering an unusual sentence. You will be hanged at noon on one weekday in the following week, but the execution will be unexpected. You will not know the day of your hanging until the executioner comes for you. At first, it seems like a strange punishment, but you think it through. How can this hanging be unexpected if you know it's coming sometime in the week? You reason that the hanging cannot happen on Friday, because if you make it through Thursday, you will know it's Friday, and therefore it can't happen unexpectedly. As the week progresses, you eliminate each day as a possibility. By Thursday, you're certain you will not be hanged at all. But then, on Wednesday, the executioner arrives. Your knees weaken as you realize the hanging has caught you completely off guard. It happened unexpectedly, just as the judge had said. Breaking it down. The paradox of the unexpected hanging plays with our expectations of knowledge and certainty. It shows how our assumptions about time, fate, and prediction can lead to contradictions. Even when we think we know what will happen, our expectations can trap us into being surprised. The paradox forces us to consider how prediction and certainty interact with time and events. It highlights the tension between knowing something in theory and having it unfold in a way that defies our expectations. 8. The paradox of the ravens. You're standing in a field, gazing up at a sky filled with clouds. You notice something. A black raven perched on a nearby fence post. You've learned something in school about how we form generalizations from observation. All ravens are black, you recall. But then you wonder, how many observations does it take to confirm that all ravens are black? As you ponder, you notice something strange. Another raven, just a few feet away, is also black. You smile, confirming your hypothesis. But then, something even stranger happens. Someone walks past you, holding a white sock. As they pass, they drop it on the ground, and you pick it up, thinking nothing of it. But here's the twist. Does the white sock also confirm the hypothesis that all ravens are black? Logically, it seems to make sense. Seeing a white sock is technically an observation that does not contradict the idea that all ravens are black. But intuitively, it feels off. How can a white sock have anything to do with ravens? Breaking it down. This is the raven paradox, which challenges how we confirm generalizations. It questions how observations, seemingly unrelated, can still affect our beliefs about the world. It forces us to confront the limitations of our reasoning. Just because something doesn't contradict a statement doesn't necessarily support it. This paradox raises deeper questions about confirmation bias and how we construct knowledge based on incomplete or unrelated observations. 9. The paradox of the arrow. You are watching an archery contest in a vast open field. The competitor stands at the ready, aiming his arrow at the target. As you watch, you realize something peculiar. The arrow, in any given moment, is always stationary. Each instant that passes, the arrow is at rest in one place, halfway between the archer and the target, or at the exact point in flight where its speed has been reduced to nothing. In that very moment, the arrow isn't moving, and yet the arrow continues on its path toward the target. It's a contradiction. How can something that's stationary be in motion? Breaking it down. This is the arrow paradox, proposed by Zeno of Elea. It challenges our understanding of motion and time. If time is divided into infinitely small moments, then in each moment, the arrow is at rest. But we know that the arrow does travel, and it reaches the target. This paradox forces us to reconsider the nature of movement, time, and the way we experience the world around us. It challenges the idea that time can be divided infinitely, and in doing so, questions how we understand change itself. 10. The paradox of the time traveler's letter. You find yourself holding an envelope, written in your own handwriting. The date on the letter is years in the future, a time when you've long forgotten about this moment. In the letter, you read something cryptic. You must travel back in time and deliver this letter to yourself at this exact moment. You will understand why when you read it. You're stunned. You've been given a mission by yourself, a directive from your future self. You try to ignore the possibility, but something compels you to act. You travel back to this moment, just like the letter instructed, and hand it to your past self. But here's the catch. As you hand the letter to yourself, you wonder, did you ever really choose to act on this letter? Or did it merely set events in motion so that you would follow its instructions? Breaking it down. This is a variation of the causal loop paradox. Often explored in time travel narratives, it suggests that events can unfold because they are destined to happen, creating a loop where the origin of an event is influenced by the very event itself. It challenges the notion of free will and causality. Can we truly make independent decisions, or are we bound by the consequences of our past and future choices? 11. The paradox of the barber. You walk into a small, peaceful village where a curious problem arises. The townspeople are talking about the barber, a well-respected man in the village who has a peculiar rule. The barber shaves all those and only those men in the village who do not shave themselves. The situation seems clear at first. The barber shaves all the men who don't shave themselves, and all the men who shave themselves are excluded from the barber's services. But then you begin to ask yourself, who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, then according to the rule, he shouldn't be shaving himself, as only those who don't shave themselves can be shaved by him. But if he doesn't shave himself, then according to the rule, he must shave himself. Breaking it down. This is the barber paradox, a self-referential puzzle that forces us to confront the problem of paradoxes within sets. It's a variation of Russell's paradox, which challenges the limits of logical definitions. The barber's rule cannot consistently apply to him without creating a contradiction. It challenges the idea of self-reference and sets, highlighting how seemingly simple rules can unravel into deep contradictions when applied to their own boundaries. 12. The paradox of free will. You wake up one morning to find yourself standing at a crossroads, literally and figuratively. On the left is a path that leads through a forest, while on the right is a road that leads to the city. You are completely free to choose which path to take, or so you think. As you stand there, contemplating your decision, a question lingers in your mind. If you have the freedom to choose, can you truly make a choice? Every thought, every impulse seems predetermined by your experiences, your environment, and your brain chemistry. The weight of your decision feels heavy, but are you really in control? Is there any true freedom, or are we merely following a path laid out before us by forces beyond our control? Breaking it down. This is the free will paradox. It's the age-old debate between determinism and free will. If everything is determined by past events, including the laws of physics and biology, can we really make independent choices? Or are our decisions simply the results of a chain of cause and effect? This paradox challenges the very nature of human agency and the idea that we are free to make choices. It forces us to consider whether freedom is an illusion created by our own perception. 13. The paradox of the future twin. Imagine that you're in a small room filled with complex scientific equipment. The experiment is set. You're about to witness something that will change the course of your life. You're part of an experiment designed to observe the effects of time dilation as you and your twin brother are sent to opposite ends of the galaxy, at speeds near the speed of light. You say goodbye to your twin, both of you eager for the experiment to begin. As you travel through the stars, you experience time as though it's moving slowly, and when you return, years later, you expect to see your twin looking much older. But when you reunite, your twin looks the same age, as if time had moved differently for him, even though you've both been traveling in opposite directions. Here's the twist. Despite everything, your twin is from the future. They didn't age because they were traveling in a way that altered the way time passed for them. When you both meet again, there's a profound realization. Your twin isn't just from the future. They've always been your future self. The space-time continuum has played a trick on you both. Breaking it down, the future twin paradox involves the idea that time dilation doesn't just affect objects in motion. It creates two versions of reality that seem to contradict each other. One twin ages while the other stays the same, creating a paradox of perception and reality. It forces us to ask, can two versions of time exist simultaneously? What happens when we separate time from space? And how does that impact our very understanding of self and continuity? 14. The paradox of the infinite hotel. You're standing in front of a massive hotel that stretches into the sky. It's called the Hilbert Hotel, and it's said to have an infinite number of rooms. Every room is occupied, and yet, despite the hotel being full, the hotel manager assures you that they can always accommodate more guests. At first, you're skeptical. How could an infinite hotel have room for more people if it's already full? But the manager has a solution. He moves every guest from room 1 to room 2, from room 2 to room 3, and so on. Suddenly, room 1 is open, and a new guest can be accommodated. But then, another group of infinitely many new guests arrives. How can the hotel handle an infinite number of new guests? The manager just repeats the process. Move each guest from room 1 to room 2, room 2 to room 3, and so on. There's always room, no matter how many guests arrive. Breaking it down. This is Hilbert's paradox of the infinite hotel. It's a paradox that challenges our understanding of infinity. While finite spaces are limited, infinite spaces can always accommodate more, even when they are full. The paradox shows how our intuitions about numbers and infinity are often faulty. When dealing with infinity, the normal rules of space and time break down, and it forces us to confront the limits of our understanding of the infinite. 15. The paradox of the tortoise and Achilles. You're at the edge of an ancient racecourse, and you've been watching the famous Greek hero Achilles preparing to race a slow-moving tortoise. Achilles, being a legendary athlete, has been given a 10-meter head start, while the tortoise starts at the starting line. The race begins, but as you watch, something strange happens. Achilles runs with incredible speed, but every time he reaches the point where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved just a little farther ahead. No matter how fast Achilles runs, he will never catch the tortoise, because by the time he reaches the tortoise's last position, the tortoise has moved a small distance further. It's as if Achilles is always playing catch-up, stuck in an eternal chase. Breaking it down, this is the Zeno's paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. It suggests that no matter how fast you run, you will never catch up to something ahead of you, because the time it takes to get to each point is infinitely divisible. This paradox forces us to reconsider how we understand motion and time. It highlights the challenges in understanding the nature of infinity and the breakdown of logic when dealing with infinite steps or moments. 16. The paradox of the unexpected hanging. You're sitting in a dimly lit prison cell, the air thick with anticipation. The warden enters with an announcement that sends chills down your spine. You'll be hanged at noon on one weekday, but it will be a surprise. This statement sends a flood of thoughts through your mind. You begin trying to outsmart the situation, calculating the days of the week. You reason, if they're going to hang me on Friday, then I would know by Thursday, so it can't be Friday. You continue eliminating each day logically. If not Friday, then Thursday is impossible because by Wednesday, I would know it's Thursday. This process goes on, and eventually you convince yourself that you cannot be hanged on any of the days. But then, on Wednesday, to your shock and disbelief, the guards come for you. The execution is scheduled for that very day. A complete surprise. The paradox lies in your own reasoning. Despite everything you calculated, the hanging occurred, just as the warden promised. But how? How could you have been surprised if you had accounted for every possible day? Breaking it down. The unexpected. Hanging paradox demonstrates how our expectations of certainty can be flawed, especially when it comes to logical reasoning. It forces us to confront the idea that sometimes, no matter how much we plan, surprise can still find a way to defy all predictions. It raises questions about how our minds process knowledge and anticipate outcomes, showing that certainty is often an illusion. 17. The paradox of the Monty Hall problem. You're on a game show standing in front of 3 doors. Behind one is a shiny new car, and behind the other 2, there are goats. You make your choice. Door 1. Monty Hall, the host, who knows what's behind each door, opens door 3 and reveals a goat. Now, Monty offers you a deal. You can stick with your original choice, or you can switch to door 2. It seems like it doesn't matter. You're down to 2 doors, one with a car, the other with a goat. But wait, does it matter? If you stay, you have a 1 in 2 chance of winning. But mathematically, your chances of winning actually double if you switch. Confused? Here's the key. When you initially picked door 1, you had a 1 in 3 chance of getting the car. But after Monty reveals the goat behind door 3, the probability shifts. The chance of the car being behind door 2 is now 2 in 3. Breaking it down, the Monty Hall paradox is a powerful example of how probability often defies our instincts. It forces us to confront our assumptions about randomness and chance. The paradox exposes how our minds often misinterpret probability, showing that the best strategy isn't always the one that feels right, but rather the one backed by mathematical reasoning. 18. The paradox of the liar. Imagine you're having a conversation with a person who says to you, "I always lie." You immediately stop and think, can that be true? If the person always lies, then the statement itself must be a lie. But if it's a lie, then it must actually be true. You find yourself stuck, unable to resolve the contradiction. If the statement is true, then it's false. But if it's false, then it's true. This is a logical loop that leaves you unable to make sense of the statement. Breaking it down, the liar paradox is a self-referential problem that has fascinated philosophers for centuries. It challenges the very nature of truth, showing us how language and logic can break down when they refer to themselves. The paradox forces us to ask, what happens when truth itself is uncertain or contradictory? 19. The paradox of the bootstrap. You come across an old dusty book in a library, a book that contains detailed instructions on how to build a time machine. It's a fascinating read, and after months of study, you finally manage to construct the device described within the pages. But then, a strange thought hits you. Where did the book come from? You never saw it anywhere until you traveled back in time to give it to yourself. In fact, you realize the knowledge you used to build the machine came from you. It came from the future. This creates a paradox. The knowledge of how to build a time machine seems to have no origin. It exists only because you traveled back in time to give it to yourself. Who is the original author of the instructions? Breaking it down, the bootstrap paradox is a classic example of a causal loop, where something exists without a clear origin. It forces us to rethink our ideas of cause and effect, knowledge, and time. If something can exist without a starting point, it challenges our understanding of how reality functions and how information is created and passed on. 20. The paradox of the two envelopes. You're given two envelopes, each containing money, and you're told one envelope contains twice as much money as the other. You pick envelope 1 and open it. Inside, you find $100. Now, you're given a choice. Do you stick with envelope 1 or switch to envelope 2? Your first instinct might be to switch, as you think there's a 50-50 chance of picking the larger sum. But then, you start calculating. The amount inside envelope 1 is $100, and you reason that envelope 2 could either have $200, double the amount, or $50, half the amount. It turns out that the expected value of switching is always higher than the amount in your current envelope. No matter what, you should always switch. Breaking it down, the two envelopes paradox forces us to confront how we understand probability and expectation. It shows how our intuitions about decision-making can often be flawed, and how math doesn't always align with our gut feelings. The paradox illustrates the complexity of making choices when faced with uncertainty, where the best decision might not always be the most obvious one. 21. The paradox of time travel and self-interaction. Imagine you have successfully built a time machine. The excitement is palpable as you step inside and travel back in time to meet your younger self. You decide to give your younger self advice that will change the course of your life for the better. But as you start speaking, you realize something chilling. The version of you from the past cannot exist in the same timeline as you. If you interact too much, you might change the course of history in ways that prevent you from ever building the time machine in the first place. Now you wonder, could your present self and your past self even exist in the same moment? And if you change one small thing, will the chain of events collapse entirely? Breaking it down, the paradox of self-interaction highlights the complications of interacting with your own past. It raises questions about the consistency of time travel and how even the smallest change in the past could have catastrophic consequences. It challenges our understanding of how time works and whether the past, present, and future are interconnected in a way that cannot be altered. 22. The paradox of the perfect circle. You're tasked with creating the perfect circle. Armed with precision tools, you measure and adjust with meticulous care, making sure every curve aligns perfectly with the next. The idea seems simple. Create a flawless, symmetrical circle. Yet, every time you attempt it, something feels off. No matter how precise you are, the circle never quite seems perfect. The paradox arises from the fact that, by definition, a perfect circle is an idealization. In reality, any attempt to create a perfect circle will fall short. Even if your circle is incredibly close, it can never truly match the ideal in a mathematical sense, because perfection itself is unreachable. This challenge is rooted in the very concept of perfection, where attempting to create something perfect only exposes the limits of human ability and measurement. Breaking it down, the perfect circle paradox shows us that perfection is a concept beyond physical realization. It forces us to question whether true perfection exists in reality or only as a theoretical concept. It challenges the very nature of our perception of ideal forms and how our attempts to achieve them always seem to fall short. 23. The paradox of the omnipotent being. You're sitting quietly, pondering the nature of an omnipotent being, one that is all-powerful and can do anything. But then, an intriguing question arises. Can an omnipotent being create a rock so heavy that even they cannot lift it? If the being can create such a rock, it would mean there is something that even they cannot do, which challenges the idea of being omnipotent. But if they cannot create the rock, that also implies a limitation, which contradicts the definition of omnipotence. Breaking it down, the omnipotence paradox explores the limits of power and the nature of absolute ability. It challenges us to think about whether true omnipotence can exist in a logically consistent manner. The paradox raises the question, can something be truly all-powerful if it cannot even perform logically contradictory tasks? 24. The paradox of free will and determinism. Imagine you are at a crossroads with two paths ahead of you, one that leads to a bright future and one that seems filled with obstacles. You stand there for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision. Do you choose freely, or is your choice predetermined? Perhaps your mind tells you it's all up to you, that you have complete control over your actions. But then you wonder, was this decision already made for you, long before you even thought about it? If every event in your life has a cause and effect, where does free will fit in? Are you truly in control of your actions, or are they just the result of a long chain of causality from the moment of your birth? The paradox lies in how free will and determinism seem to contradict each other. If the universe is deterministic, then your sense of freedom is an illusion. Breaking it down, the free will and determinism paradox asks whether we can ever truly make free choices, or if our actions are just determined by prior causes. It forces us to reflect on the nature of choice and whether we can ever act freely in a universe governed by rules and laws. This paradox raises questions about the very essence of human autonomy and agency. 25. The paradox of the dinosaur's footprint. You walk through a forest, and your eyes catch something unusual. On the ground, half buried in the mud, is an ancient footprint. The shape is undeniably that of a large prehistoric creature, perhaps a dinosaur. But then, you realize something unsettling. This footprint shouldn't exist. Dinosaurs roamed the earth millions of years ago, yet this footprint seems impossibly recent. It's as if someone created it intentionally. You begin to wonder, could this be a hoax, or is the very fabric of time beginning to unravel? The paradox here is time itself. If the dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, how can we have footprints from them today? The footprint, even though it appears real, breaks the continuity of time, suggesting that there might be no truly fixed timeline. Could time loop back on itself in ways we cannot understand? Breaking it down, the dinosaur footprint paradox highlights the fragility of time and our understanding of history. It forces us to question how we define time's passage, and whether certain events might break through the established timeline, creating inconsistencies and paradoxical situations. It challenges the very notion of linear history and suggests that what we perceive as the past could be far more flexible than we believe. 26. The paradox of the infinite library. You enter a grand library, its shelves stretching endlessly into the distance. Each shelf is filled with books of every possible combination of letters and words. In this infinite library, you realize something profound. Every book that has ever been written or will ever be written is contained within these walls. You think about it for a moment. There are books with every possible story, every conversation, every combination of events that could ever occur. In fact, there are books containing the entire future, every possible outcome of every decision you make. But then, you come across a book that's unsettling. It's the story of your life. As you read, you notice something odd. It doesn't seem to end. You flip through the pages, and you realize that no matter how many pages you turn, the story never finishes. It's as if the library's contents are infinite, but they're also incomplete, endlessly filling in the gaps of what could happen. Breaking it down. The infinite library paradox challenges our understanding of knowledge and information. It suggests that everything is predetermined and exists within this infinite archive. But the question arises, if everything exists in infinite forms, can we ever truly act freely or change our fate? The paradox also invites us to ask whether true knowledge can ever be comprehended, or whether the universe is an infinite collection of stories, events, and outcomes beyond our grasp. 27. The paradox of the mirror. You stand before a mirror, gazing at your reflection. But then something strange happens. Your reflection begins to act independently. You raise your right hand, and your reflection raises its left. You blink, and your reflection doesn't. It starts to act in a completely different way than you, moving in its own rhythm, with its own decisions. The paradox comes from the question, if the reflection is supposed to be you, why is it acting differently? If you and the reflection are two versions of the same, why does the reflection behave independently, almost as though it has its own identity? Breaking it down, the mirror paradox highlights the dissonance between our internal identity and how we perceive ourselves externally. It forces us to consider the nature of the self and how much of our identity exists outside of our own consciousness. If the reflection acts differently, can we still claim it represents the true version of ourselves? The paradox exposes the complexities of self-awareness and perception. 28. The paradox of the chicken and the egg. You sit down at the table, contemplating a simple question that has been asked for millennia. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? On one hand, the egg has to come first. After all, the egg is the precursor to the chicken, allowing for the species to continue. But then, how did the first egg come into existence without a chicken to lay it? The egg's very existence seems to rely on the chicken, yet the chicken's existence relies on the egg. Breaking it down, the chicken and egg paradox presents a cyclical dilemma in which the origin of one seems inherently tied to the other. It forces us to reconsider the very nature of beginnings and creation. Can anything truly exist without its predecessor? Or does everything rely on an infinite chain of causes and effects? 29. The paradox of time travel and aging. Imagine you travel forward in time to a distant future. The world is unrecognizable. Technology has evolved beyond your wildest dreams. Yet, when you look at yourself, you're still the same age you were when you left. You realize that while time has moved forward for everyone else, you have not aged a single day. In this paradox, you're confronted with the strange reality of how time affects you. You've traveled forward, but you're left with an entirely different experience of time compared to those around you. If time moves differently for you than it does for everyone else, does time even exist in the same way for everyone? Breaking it down, the time travel and aging paradox challenges our understanding of how time flows for different individuals. It poses the question, can time truly be experienced uniformly, or do those who travel through it experience it in completely distinct ways? 30. The paradox of the time traveler's dilemma. You arrive in the past, intending to prevent a terrible event from occurring, perhaps a war or a personal tragedy. But as you intervene, something changes in the timeline that you didn't foresee. The more you try to fix it, the more things go wrong. you begin to wonder, is there any way to change the past without making things worse? This paradox revolves around the idea of changing the past. Can any action truly fix something? Or does it only create more problems? Every time you attempt to correct history, you create an even more complicated scenario. Breaking it down, the time traveler's dilemma forces us to question the effect of our actions on the past. Can time be rewritten? Or does every attempt to alter it result in greater confusion and destruction? It raises the question of whether certain events are simply unchangeable, no matter how hard we try. 31. The paradox of the infinite staircase. You find yourself standing at the bottom of an impossibly long staircase. It's said that this staircase has no end, no beginning, a loop that can be ascended, but never fully completed. Each step you take leads to another step that never seems to end. The paradox here is the nature of infinity. If the staircase is infinite, can you ever reach the top? Or is it only an illusion, a concept designed to show us the limitations of space, time, and perception? Breaking it down. The infinite staircase paradox reveals the paradoxical nature of infinity. It's something we can conceptualize, but never fully understand or experience. We're drawn towards the idea of endless progress, yet the closer we come to completion, the more elusive it becomes. It forces us to rethink our approach to limits and whether we can ever truly reach the end of an infinite journey. 32. The paradox of consciousness and the brain. You're sitting in a room, surrounded by people, yet you're completely alone in your thoughts. You realize something profound. Your mind, your consciousness, is not a physical object. It exists in a space beyond the brain, in a realm of thoughts and experiences. But then, how does your mind connect to your brain? If consciousness cannot be located physically, how does it interact with the brain's neural processes? Is consciousness a separate entity, or is it simply a byproduct of brain activity? Breaking it down, the consciousness paradox challenges us to understand the relationship between mind and body. It raises the question, is consciousness a product of the brain, or does it exist outside of it? The paradox highlights our limited understanding of self-awareness and challenges our assumptions about the nature of the mind. 33. The paradox of the self-fulfilling prophecy. You're told that a certain event will happen in your future, one that seems inevitable, but the more you believe it will occur, the more your actions align with that prediction. You begin to notice that the very belief in the event is causing it to happen. This is the paradox of the self-fulfilling prophecy. The belief in the future outcome leads to actions that create that outcome. Yet the event itself was never truly inevitable. It was shaped by your own expectations and behaviors. Breaking it down, the self-fulfilling prophecy. Paradox shows how belief shapes reality. It forces us to reflect on how our expectations influence the future and whether we can ever break free from the cycles we create with our own beliefs. 34. The paradox of personal identity. You look in the mirror and wonder, who are you? Your body has changed over the years. Your memories have shifted, and even your thoughts and beliefs evolve. Are you still the same person you were years ago? Or are you fundamentally different now? This paradox revolves around the continuity of personal identity. How can someone be the same person throughout their life when everything about them changes? The more you think about it, the more difficult it becomes to define the boundaries of who you are. Breaking it down, the personal identity paradox challenges our understanding of selfhood. It forces us to confront the idea that identity is not a fixed, unchanging concept. Instead, it's fluid, and constantly evolving. But if we change, can we still claim to be the same person? The paradox invites us to reconsider the nature of identity and what it truly means to be you.